seventh grade ELA today, we're going to read The Tale of the Mandarin Ducks. While it might look like a picture book, it actually is on a seventh grade level, lexile level. So the vocabulary is extensive and we'll be exploring that in another lesson. But today we're going to talk about theme, summary, and making inferences. So we're kind of doing a little bit of a review with this text today. It is a folk tale, so it's going to be a little bit different. There are going to be some things that really couldn't happen in real life. Remember, in that genre that entail tall tales and folk tales and things like that, that we don't always see those things in real life. So our essential question today, based on the evidence of this story, what is the theme? Now, to quickly recount, theme is the lesson that you learn, the life lesson, the moral that you can apply from the story. It's what do you learn from the story and how can you apply that to your own life. We'll be focusing in today on inferences and how do they help us to develop the theme. Keeping in mind, inference is when you make a guess based on what you already know plus what the text says. And you put those two things together and you come up with an educated guess, so to speak. For instance, if you hear a fire truck, you know that there's probably a fire, and that comes from some prior knowledge, which we call our schema. The prior knowledge that we can associate that sound of a fire truck with the possibility of there being a fire. So if you hear a fire truck, you automatically know that that's going to mean that there's probably a fire somewhere. So making an inference can help us to develop the theme. Sometimes the theme is not explicitly stated in the text. Sometimes it's an implied theme, and we have to make some inferences to figure out what the lesson is of that story. Now, all the while, remember, we're going to summarize our text. So we'll go over a strategy for summarizing literary text today. And it might be one that's familiar, it might be something new that you could use that would help you to give a brief retelling or a summary of that text. So these bulleted items are the things that we're going to do in the order that we're going to do them in. The first thing we're going to do is listen to an audio, and also they're showing the pages also. So we're kind of watching The Tale of the Mandarin Ducks. This takes place in Japan. So for those of you who are my geography people, you know that that's on the other side of planet Earth. So this is not something that happened here locally in our culture. And you'll see a lot of the vocabulary that's brought into the text is vocabulary that would be used in those Asian countries. We're going to then summarize the story, which will help us to come up with our theme. Then we'll decide what lesson did we learn from this story. And we'll identify the inferences that helped us arrive at that theme. So sit back, relax, we're going to listen. It's about a 10-minute audio of The Tale of the Mandarin Ducks.
The Tale of the Mandarin Ducks by Catherine Patterson, illustrated by Leo and Diane Dillon. Long ago and far away in the land of the rising sun, there lived together a pair of mandarin ducks. Now the drake was a magnificent bird with plumage of colors so rich that the emperor himself would have envied it. But his mate, the duck, wore the quiet tones of the wood, blending exactly with the hole in the tree where the two had made their nest. One day, while the duck was sitting on her eggs, the drake flew down to a nearby pond to search for food. While he was there, a hunting party entered the woods. The hunters were led by the lord of the district, a proud and cruel man who believed that everything in the district belonged to him to do with as he chose. The lord was always looking for beautiful things to adorn his manor house and garden. And when he saw the drake swimming gracefully on the surface of the pond, he determined to capture him. The lord's chief steward, a man named Shozo, tried to discourage his master. "The drake is a wild spirit, my lord," he said. "Surely he will die in captivity." But the Lord pretended not to hear Shozo. Secretly, he despised Shozo because although Shozo had once been his mightiest samurai, the warrior had lost an eye in battle and was no longer handsome to look upon. The Lord ordered his servants to clear a narrow way through the undergrowth and place acorns along the path. When the drake came out of the water, he saw the acorns. How pleased he was! He forgot to be cautious, thinking only of what a feast they would make to take home to his mate. Just as he was bending to pick up an acorn in his scarlet beak, a net fell over him, and the frightened bird was carried back to the Lord's manor and placed in a small bamboo cage. The Lord was delighted with his new pet. He ordered a feast to be prepared and invited all the wealthy landowners from miles around so that he could show off the drake and brag about his wonderful plumage, which was indeed more beautiful than the finest brocade. But the drake could think only of his mate sitting alone on her eggs, not knowing what had happened to her husband. As the days wore on, his crested head began to droop. His lovely feathers lost their luster. His proud, wild cry became first a weary cronk, and then he fell silent. No matter what delicacies the kitchen maid brought him, he refused to eat. He is grieving for his mate, the girl thought, for she was wise in the customs of wild creatures. The Lord, who liked things only so long as they were beautiful and brought him honor, grew angry when he saw that the drake was ailing. Perhaps we should let him go, Shozo suggested, since he no longer pleases you, my lord. But the Lord did not like anyone to tell him what to do, much less a one-eyed servant. He refused to release the drake, ordering instead that the cage be put out of sight so that he would no longer be annoyed by the bird's sad appearance. When Yasuko, for this was the kitchen maid's name, saw that the drake had been cast aside and his cage relegated to the far corner of the kitchen garden, she determined to save his life. One night, when there was no moon, she crept into the garden. Without a sound, she opened the door of the cage and gently lifted out the drake. Since he was now too weak to fly, she carried him to the edge of the woods and put him on the ground. The drake shook himself, turned once, as though he were bound to her, and quickly blended into the darkness. In a great house, there are always those who delight in causing mischief. So it was that by mid-morning, the news of the drake's disappearance had reached the ears of the Lord. Now, even though the Lord no longer desired the drake, he was furious at the thought that someone else should take what he considered his own. Immediately, he called for Shozo. "Why have you stolen my drake?" he demanded. Shozo simply bowed his head. He would say nothing in his own defense, for although he had not done so, he had often wanted to release the drake. To his mind, desiring to unlatch the cage and actually lifting the latch were one and the same. The Lord ordered that Shozo be beaten and stripped of his rank in the household. Although Shozo had once been a brave samurai, second only to the Lord himself, he was now forced to haul the waste and scrub the toilets. When Yasuko saw how he had been humiliated, she told Shozo what she had done and begged him to let her confess. Shozo forbade her to tell anyone. Why should two suffer for one crime, he asked, but he took comfort in her concern. As the days passed, Yasuko and Shozo came to love each other, and this love shone so radiantly that finally they could no longer keep it hidden. Eventually, the mischief maker told the Lord of their love, and Yasuko and Shozo were called into his presence. "It is apparent to me," he said, "that the two of you conspired to rob me of my beautiful drake. Until now, I have been merciful, but you have taken advantage of my good nature. Therefore, I must make an example of you to all who would resist my will. You are hereby sentenced to death by drowning." Since the Lord's word was law, there was no way to oppose him. He called to his retainers, had the criminals bound, and prepared to march them to the pond for execution. But just as they were about to set out, two messengers arrived at the gate. It was obvious from their rich dress that the messengers were persons of great importance. "We have been sent by the emperor," they told the Lord. "His divine majesty has had a vision of the merciful Buddha, who ordered him to abolish capital punishment throughout the empire. Therefore, if there is anyone in your district under the sentence of death, you are directed to send him at once to the imperial court." The Lord was very angry at this order, angry enough to kill the messengers who had brought it. But he knew he had no choice. He commanded his retainers to march the condemned couple to the capital. Now the march was a 5-day journey. As the days wore on, Yasuko and Shozo became weary and began to lag behind the retainers. At the end of the 3rd day, in the midst of deep woods, the unhappy pair were so tired they could not walk another step. The impatient guards yelled at them to hurry and kept up the rapid pace. The truth of the matter was that the retainers, who seemed so brave, were frightened by the dark woods. As night fell, the darkness deepened. Yasuko and Shozo could hardly see one straw sandal step ahead of the other. Before long, they realized that the guards had left them behind. They were alone, without food or drink, in the middle of the cold forest. They tried to stumble on through the blackness, but soon lost the path. "Hurrah!" cried Yasuko. "See what I have done? If it were not for my foolishness, we would be back at the manor, safe and warm." "Hush," said Shozo. "It is not foolishness to show compassion for a fellow creature. Besides, what danger of forest could match the cruelty of our former master?" "I wish my hands were not bound behind me," Yasuko said. "I don't think I would be afraid if I could take hold of your hand." "Come here," Shozo said. "Stand as close as you can so that your shoulder is touching mine. Then we will not lose each other in the darkness." At that moment they heard a rustling sound. The two stood still as pillars of stone, trying not to be frightened. "Ah," said a kind voice, "we have found you. Don't be afraid. We will take you to a place where you can rest." "Who are you that speaks to us?" Shozo asked. He could not keep his voice from trembling. "We are the imperial messengers," replied another, whose form was also hidden by the impenetrable night. Yasuko and Shozo knew that they must obey, but they still couldn't help being a little frightened. They could see nothing in the blackness, and the rustle of the messengers' silk garments made a ghostly sound as they walked ahead. Finally, the four of them came to a tiny clearing in the forest. There in the moonlight stood a hut made of wood and grass. The messengers took Yasuko and Shozo inside. First, they lit a lamp, then they untied the ropes that bound them. Gently, the messengers massaged the servants' wrists. Each of them was allowed a long soak in a great wooden bathtub filled with clean, hot water. When at last Yasuko and Shozo were dressed in fresh kimonos, a wonderful feast was set before them. The two servants ate gratefully, too tired to wonder how the messengers had come upon such a delicious food in the middle of a forest. After they had finished eating, pallets and quilts were laid out for them on the tatami floor, and they fell asleep at once. In the morning, Yasuko and Shozo were awakened by the smell of rice steaming and bean soup bubbling in the iron pot. But the messengers were nowhere to be seen. "We failed to thank them for their kindness," Yasuko said. They jumped up and ran to the door of the hut. There on the path were a pair of mandarin ducks. The drake wore plumage so rich and colorful that the emperor himself might have envied it, while his mate wore the quiet tones of the wood. The pair turned and seemed to bow, then lifting themselves into the air, they flew straight and swift as the arrows fly above the highest trees of the forest. Yasuko and Shozo lived on for many years in their hut of wood and grass. They had many children who gave them much happiness and a little trouble, but as they had learned years before, trouble can always be borne when it is shared.
Okay, so in that last statement, we realize that the theme of this story, of this folktale, has been stated. So in the Tale of the Mandarin Ducks, we do have the theme stated at the end, where she states, the author states, they have learned that trouble is best borne when it is shared. If we had not had that sentence there, we could have made some inferences to help us determine that was what we could learn from this story, that was in fact the theme. There was one part where Yasuko says to her maid when he was taking the blame that you should let me confess, and he says, why should two have to pay for the crimes of one? So that was a part where you could see that they were sharing that trouble together. Also, when they were in the forest and Yasuko was scared, then she wants just to take hold of his hand. She felt like she would be stronger if the two of them could share that trouble together. So there are some inferences that can be made. But before we get to making all of those inferences, let's first talk about a strategy that we can use to summarize what has just happened in the text. So if you were going to give a summary, a brief retelling of this, you could use a strategy that's very easy, and you might already have known it from some years 1st through 5th grades, but we also use it in 6th, 7th, and 8th at the middle school. So it's someone wanted, but so then. So we think about who was the someone in this story. So we know the someone that gets the story started is in fact that greedy Lord. So we have the greedy Lord who is wanting to, what is he wanting to do? And if you think back to it, he is wanting to enjoy the mandarin duck's beauty. So he captures the beauty of this mandarin duck, and he puts him into a cage. But what happens after that? We see that there is some hope for this trapped mandarin duck. The kitchen maid couldn't stand seeing the duck in captivity, so she frees the duck. So this kind of keeps our story going without getting into too many of those details. It just gives us the key details. So what happened after she frees the duck? She is found out, but her maid takes the blame for it. And the Lord banishes the kitchen maid and her maid for their actions and sentences them to die. But then there are, ironically, 2 messengers that come and deliver the message that the king has said to free or to march them to the capital to determine their punishment. So at that point, when the Lord has to let them go, he has to send them to the capital. So those 2 messengers are the ones that actually save them. Then en route to their execution, they're freed by the 2 messengers, and then they live happily ever after. And it goes on to say that they lived many years, bore many children, and learned that trouble is best when it's born. So if we put all of this together, the someone wanted, but so then you have answered the questions necessary to write an effective summary for a literary text. And it would come out to a paragraph that looks something like this. The greedy Lord captures the drake to enjoy its beautiful plumage, separating a pair of inseparable mandarin ducks. The kind kitchen maid, no longer able to bear the duck in captivity, frees it from its cage. When the Lord discovers the missing drake, he banishes the servant and her husband, deciding they must be executed. In a surprising turn of events, the servants are freed by 2 messengers, beautifully dressed in garments that mock the colors of the ducks. So there's an inference made there that these 2 messengers were in fact the ducks. Okay, now let's go on to the theme. It is explicitly stated in the text, and it says that trouble can always be born when it's shared. But the text-based evidence that helps us to support that inference, when the kitchen maid frees the duck, her maid takes the blame for it. So he actually is taking the blame, so that trouble is best shared with 2. When they're sentenced to die, they cling to each other. So that again is symbolic of trouble being born, best born when it's shared. And when they're exiled, there are 2 messengers that come to save them. So all in all, the theme of this story is that trouble is best when can best be born when it is shared with someone else. And we can apply that directly to our lives. So I hope you've enjoyed the Tale of the Mandarin Ducks. I hope that it's given you something to think about, and I hope that it's helped to review those skills of summary, inference, and theme. Thank you.